Do you think it's better that the people in your position would have to have a PhD?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think so. Because I've met plenty of brilliant people and more free thinking as well. So more creative in the solutions that they come up with that don't have PhDs or aren't pursuing PhDs. I think that there are plenty of people who pursue PhDs that are very creative um, and very capable of coming up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. But I don't think just because you're pursuing a PhD, it inherently makes you qualified for a role like that with the way that your brain works. Because academia, as we know, it can beat people down and take creativity out of people instead of doing what we assume it will do, which is like infusing creativity into people. It can also have the alternate effect depending on who you're working with and the experiences that you have. So it's kind of a double-edged sword because it can promote people, but it can also really dull them.
Definitely. And we're live.
Okay.
I'm Freddie Lancia,
I'm Moronke Harris.
and this is the Post Definitions Podcast.
I've noticed it most in grad school, but usually when I start to think about things that I want to do, especially pertaining to my thesis, I almost don't want to start certain activities because I feel like if I don't get it right the first time, then it's going to be a disaster and there won't be a chance to get it right again. So I end up procrastinating out of that freeze response, which I'm learning to get over, but it's a process.
Everyone I talked to who was doing a PhD, they said pretty much the same thing. I wonder why that personality is drawn to something so difficult and massive.
I don't know. I think if I had to theorize, I think it's because we're all gifted kids who, either gifted kids or people who became gifted academically who felt that they had to live up to these standards. Because usually when you were good at something or discovered you're good at something, then you feel like you always have to be that good and perform at that level.
Yeah, wow.
So it adds to the pressure. I'm not a psychologist, but...
Yeah, but the whole thing is that we just go on this podcast and we act like we're psychologists and philosophers and anthropologists.
Yes.
Yeah.
That was my favorite. I took one anthropology course in undergrad and I really liked it.
Oh, that's sick.
I hated psychology and sociology, but anthropology was great.
Why?
I don't know. I think I was most fascinated by the study of how humans came to be, like evolutionarily. Yeah, just going through the different iterations of our biological bone structures and how we got to what we are now. Probably because it was the closest to science, hard science, in relation to the others, maybe, or the closest that I could see.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, well, maybe evolution is, but I think that the rest of anthropology is quite soft compared to even psychology, in my opinion. It's like I don't know. I haven't studied too much anthropology, but it's sort of like making big assumptions about how all humans and societies work, when if you look closer, I think almost all those rules aren't like... They're never objectively true, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense,
Oh, well, yeah, I don't know that much, actually.
I think my bias came from it being a biological anthropology course, which is why I took it. So it was definitely more science-based than... So maybe I've just never gotten a true taste of actual anthropology, like hard anthropology.
Yeah. Well, I think it's super interesting. Like, when you're exercising, like, so obviously the theory of evolution and pain is that, like, pain is supposed to prevent you from doing things that'll get you killed kind of thing.
Yeah.
Maybe that's fear. I don't know. But what really is the purpose of, like, pain during exercise when we can push past those limits, like, almost infinitely and never die?
Yeah.
It's really strange. I mean, obviously you waste energy. Like, if you have limited food, you're gonna, like, struggle to survive if you go on, like, an infinitely long run. But also, people go on infinitely long runs and they don't die.
They do. I have a friend who does ultra marathons. His name is Kyle Haybloom. I'm just going to shout him out real quick because he's crazy and he does like 100-kilometer runs and he's done multiple of them. But he is a testament to pushing past those mental barriers within physical nature. And I don't know how he does it, and I don't know what the evolutionary response is and why he doesn't have that or why he's been able to overcome that.
Yeah.
But it is interesting for sure. It's not something I can do, I'll say that.
Okay.
Definitely more of a sprinter than an endurance runner.
Okay. Evolution applies to you.
Yes, most definitely, yeah. Yeah, at least maybe mentally, I don't know. Maybe I just haven't broken through that veil yet, but maybe I will one day. Who knows? Maybe
I
everything will
wonder.
change.
I wonder if he has. I wonder what his motivation is, or even if it has to be that strong. Or
I've never questioned him. We always just get to that point where we talk about it, and then I go, "You're crazy," and he's like, "I know," and then we never get past like. So what are you thinking about when you run that long for hours on end, or like, because I could probably run for an hour, maybe, but longer than that, especially when you're doing these 9-hour marathons, like. What do you think about? What keeps you going?
What a good question. Like, that's exactly, like, the podcast. It's always about, like, we know this person's a runner. And we stop there. And we don't go into, like, what does that 9 hours, 10 hours, 24 hours look like for you? Like, you just be like, oh, wow, you run 100 miles. That's crazy. And then you just stop right when it could get really interesting.
Exactly. Yeah. It's just nothing but you and your thoughts and pushing. That's it. Extreme mental strength. I wake up before my alarm most days anyway because I'm just like, oh god, there's so much on my to-do list.
Oh fuck. And that's something that never really ends.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. It's a marathon, not a sprint. Is what I keep telling myself. It's the hardest thing I've ever done mentally. Just in terms of the way it makes you doubt yourself.
Yeah. So you were talking about how you identify as like a gifted person in the academic area, and that's how you end up putting so much pressure on yourself. And I think that there definitely is some interesting truth there, that people who learn that they are good at something, whether they're good at it or not, they then have this high standard, and then it's still hard for them to meet it. So it's kind of a sign that, maybe the biggest difference potentially between these people and the people who are like less gifted is that they see themselves as gifted, and then they try to strive for that, right?
I think so. I definitely agree with that. I think that a lot of the pressure that I placed on myself and a lot of the achievements that have come out of that have come from me feeling like you will be wasting your capability if you don't. So it's kind of me like bullying myself into achieving. And I want these things. Like, I'm chasing something that I'm passionate about, but there are certain achievements that I've gotten on the way to chasing what I'm passionate about that have purely stemmed from me bullying myself into my potential.
Yeah, that's interesting. That the things you're most proud of now are the things you weren't necessarily even aiming for, but they were like pieces to the puzzle to get to the end goal.
Yeah.
And I wonder.
And the things I'm most proud of are the things I've suffered most for.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Like, mentally.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. The thing that I think is interesting to dive into personally is just learning to have a sense of self outside of that. Because I think, at least in the way that I grew up, in the society that I grew up in, when you're really good at something, or when you show promise in something, then people are really keen on making that your identity and your sole identity. And then as you get older and you think more about who you are and what you want, you may still want that part of yourself, but you may want to add other parts to that. So you do more soul searching.
Yeah.
Yeah, look into other interests.
I think that as I've been traveling and meeting different cultures, I'm really attracted to these cultures that are a little bit more negative in the way that they allow themselves to be less polite and things like this. They're open to saying negative things that are obvious, or giving hard advice and things like that.
I think so, yeah. I think toxic positivity is very real. And I mean, we've talked about this. You know that I'm a person who leans towards positivity, but in a realistic sense. Like, if somebody has something really bad happened to them, I'm not going to go, oh, well, at least, you know, like, you don't always need to jump to the positive. A lot of pressure that comes with positivity is what I'll say. Because when positivity is there, it makes everybody feel good. And if you don't maintain that standard, then it can look negative upon you, or upon, like, or just like bring a damper upon the situation. So there is like pressure to, kind of like pressure to party, like pressure to keep things at a certain level of upbeat, you know?
Yeah.
Senses.
Did you ever run into that where you felt like you were too overly positive about something and you couldn't keep it up?
Yeah, definitely. Well, that probably the first time I've ever really realized it was my PhD in general, because it's multiple years. I've mentioned before, it's a marathon, not a sprint, so it's hard to keep the positivity going at all times. And what really helped me was speaking to other PhD students who were just real about their experience, because I got lucky with my department, and people are very real about when they're struggling and the negative experiences that they've had. But there are plenty of departments out there, or plenty of university cultures out there, where it's like, you don't talk about your struggle because it might be seen as weakness, number one, but then it also might just be seen as a damper to other students if you say, like, you know, I'm not having such a good time. Whereas, I don't know, but then there's the flip side of that coin, where there's a lot of people who feel like you should suffer for academia because academia is supposed to be hard, and, you know?
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's a tear between two types of cultures. I think the younger culture is more sort of bringing in the fact that this is not so healthy. There needs to be more of a balance, because it destroys people and in turn destroys their potential in a lot of ways, unless you're really hardened up. So you miss out on a lot of brilliant science if you're beating people's mental state down in the process to getting towards that brilliant science.
Yeah, I also find that negativity and like really high standards really crushes creativity, at least for me, because you're just so concerned about taking risks, and you don't have time to have fun and try things and all of this.
Yeah, my first experience with ocean science, the very first internship I ever did, the project that I did was something that was kind of out there. It was in coral science, but it was something that was kind of out there in comparison to the path of science usually followed. And I had senior scientists and graduate students, and I was only like fresh out of undergrad at that time, but like coming to me to grill me on the project instead of asking my supervisor, because they were skeptical of her deviating from the norm. And the way that they were grilling me wasn't like curiosity, it was more like, oh, this will never work because it's like different. But when you think about where science
That's such like a dumb I don't know, sounds like a cartoon movie about that's supposed to inspire kids to like go do step outside of the norm because there's some bullies.
But it's what truly happened. It was like my first experience in scientific academia, and I was like, that was when I first started to understand that not everybody sees it the same way. There are adventurous scientists out there, but there are a lot of people who just want to keep people within certain bounds. But it's the same as society, right? Like, there are adventurous people who want to try different things, and then there are people who are like, no, this is the way that it's always been done, and we need to keep it this way. Why would you venture outside of that?
So what do you think inspired you to venture outside of that? You said that was your professor's work, but now you probably continue to.
Yeah, I continue to venture outside of what's normally done or what's done before, and kind of, well, okay, it's twofold. There are a lot of thoughts going through my head right now, but I think
that's good.
I've always been drawn to new kinds of science and exploration more than conservation. That might trigger some people in the ocean science field, but I wouldn't label myself as a conservationist. I do think it's important to be a conservationist, and I do think that conservationists play a very important role. But what drew me to ocean science was more exploration of the unknown and finding out more about this realm and this field and this ecosystem as the ocean in total that we only know 20% about, or like something like 80% of the ocean is unexplored, and that's what really drew me towards it. And then outside of that, I'll say what caused me to want to know, kind of apply my science to what wasn't known or explore the unknown, was the fact that it needs to be applicable. And once again, I do appreciate the scientists who like go really in depth on like one specific enzyme type and one specific shrimp and like get very passionate about their very niche field. But another thing that I really like about my science and the direction I take my science is, how is it actually going to make a difference in the world, like exploration wise or resource use wise? If it's not applicable to the policy and it's not going to actually make a change, then it's not something that I'm very interested in personally. Yeah, that's a long answer.
Yeah, lots to dive into there. It's like the first thing I was thinking about was how you mentioned this word conservation and how loaded that actually is, because my first instinct was like this sort of negative connotation of sort of conservation in the sense of like politics, kind of like avoiding change, conserving what's old, what's worked, and not being really open to new ways of doing things, new positive technology and stuff like that. But then you took it in the sense of like conservation of the ecosystems and the ocean, which is actually quite a liberal thing, such a kind of a progressive thing, something that I'm interested in. And I never really, but so here's, I would say is that like you can be, and I'm sure you agree with this, and so maybe you weren't saying this, but like you can be really forward thinking in like the area of conservation, like using new technologies and new strategies
and
to
achieve
conservation of the ocean, for instance. But that's so interesting that you are interested in the exploration. It's just a big field, and that's what you're interested in, and that's great that scientists are into different things and different strategies, because then we're gonna find solutions one way or the other. And exploration could contribute to conservation, because there could be something that the scientists on the more exploration side find that the conservationists can then take and use and adapt for new technologies if they want. But totally.
that's just not my interest. And
yeah,
I've had a lot of people try to steer me more onto the conservation side, especially in ocean science. Everybody's a conservationist, you know. They're like, there are a lot of conservationists in ocean science for good reason, because we need them. But I kind of steer away from that, because I think that there are other areas that we also need to focus on, and if everybody thinks the same way, then it impedes progress as well.
Yeah, and I think it's good that there's people that dive into a single enzyme, because then they'll produce some research that you, as someone who actually wants to create change, you can use that.
Exactly.
So
it all feeds off of each other.
And your positive outlook, which I am totally agreeing with in this moment, it just feels like everything happens for a reason, you know. It's like all falling into place. People's interests are different, and that means we're going to cover everything. Like, and there are 8 billion people or something like that.
Crazy.
So we might actually just try everything.
How do we have that many people?
So, beer.
Beer break. Today is sponsored by, I won't say their name because you don't want to get sued or something.
Could we get sued
I don't know.
Could I get sued?
We'll avoid it altogether. Well, I'm sure you wouldn't get sued if you mentioned them, right? Would you?
Some people,
unless you made profit off of this, then maybe.
Well, some people, like, they advertise for a company. They'll say like, "Oh, I love this shirt that I'm wearing," or "I love this beer," and they hope like, "So sponsor me."
Yeah, well, we could totally do that.
Yeah.
Would you like to do a sponsorship with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hayward Brewing.
Brewed for adventure. Wayward Brewing Co. Try the hazy mid, juicy mid-strength pale ale.
Wow. Hired as my advertising chief advertiser.
Instantly.
Well, a previous episode was sponsored by Laughter, and it sounds like it's still sponsored by Laughter.
Yeah, I laugh a lot.
That's great. This episode is brought to you by Hayward Brewing and Laughter. That's Hayward Brewing and Laughter. That's and then there's a phone number like no.
Now you can never leave Australia if they
Sponsor
sponsor
us.
you. 'Cause
Yeah.
this is an Australian beer, so
True.
can't get it anywhere else. Maybe.
I'm stuck
Yeah.
in this great country. Yeah. So what's it like traveling the world as a Canadian? What do people think?
Oh, I think it's great. And there are other words, like if I say out or like about, then people like go like, oh,
About.
in a boot. So, so there are certain things, you know, certain stereotypes, or certain things that come through in my accent, even though I'm the closest to American. But that's my major gripe. Other than that, I have a pretty good time
Yeah.
for the most part. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
I got a lot of Trump stuff when I went to Denmark at the time, right after Trump was elected, and he was trying to buy Greenland from them.
Why would he do that?
Yeah, I
you
don't
guys
know.
already have Alaska.
Oh yeah, well, he wanted Greenland.
More.
And that's Denmark owns Greenland. If,
Yeah.
In case anyone didn't know that, it's pretty interesting. That's kind of a living example of colonialism.
Yes.
There. But anyway, I still love Denmark. Yeah, that was really funny. Just having to answer for America sometimes, and you know, I just don't. I don't know. I don't know what's happening there.
Yeah. I find that. Yeah, I do find that very interesting because people do make people answer for like as if you're a representative of a larger group. You know.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, based off of where I've lived, the closest I've gotten to that was Toronto. Being from Toronto, if people heard I was from Toronto, they'd be like, oh, and you can tell I'm from Toronto because I say Toronto and not Toronto. But because like people who aren't from Toronto say the whole, like enunciate every single syllable. But we had a mayor who was a crackhead, shout out to Rob Ford, and people asked me about him all the time, every time I traveled, because he was in the news all the time for doing crack in random places, and he was just like a very chaotic mayor.
Crazy.
So chaotic that he was internationally known, and yeah, so I experienced a little bit about that. But how do you feel about people asking you to be a representative for your country?
Nah, I don't really care. But yeah, I met some people like from the Middle East, for instance, and I would ask them like, what do they think about their country? And they would be like, well, it's a lovely place, but I hate my government, you know?
Yeah.
And that's, it's weird to ask someone to, like you said, answer for their country.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it is. Yeah. It's, I think people like to categorize people, and that's really where it stems from. Just to dive a little deeper into that. I think it's categorizing people makes us feel familiar because it makes us feel like we can control the situation, like we know what to expect from this person because we've categorized them as such. And I think that's what maybe helps people feel comfortable in a world that is really uncertain. And if we really look at it, we have no control over anything. It's a lot of us have just gotten really lucky. It's luck of the draw. But there's a lot that could go wrong for us tomorrow. Like I always say, not to get too deep.
Let's go deep.
But I always say people usually think they're one step away from a millionaire, and the reality is that most people are one step away from being homeless. So we're always looking up like, oh, I could never be that. I am going to be this. And you could be this. Like, it's good to maintain positive nature. Like, I'm a very naturally positive person, but the reality is you're closer to this, you know? So if people thought more about how much closer they were to the other side of the coin, maybe they'd be a little bit more empathetic towards the other side of the coin.
Wow. So that's like backwards positivity. It's like thinking about negativity and it leading to positive results and more like positivity towards people.
Yeah.
Like kindness.
Definitely.
There's a Romanian philosopher named Chiron, and he's always talking about death and how we're gonna die, and he says that it opens up, once you like really acknowledge it, opens up a new life, because you see like, yeah, the finiteness of things, but even more than that I don't quite understand. You know, I haven't read all the stuff, but Yeah, sometimes it works like that.
Mm-hmm.
You have to, because especially if there are truths that you're ignoring, you're just setting yourself up for this classic idea, American idea of like a midlife crisis. You know, you're gonna live your whole life hiding from something, and then you're gonna face it, and you're gonna like freak the fuck out. But if you just, those truths are gonna hit you eventually anyway. So, and they're not so bad if you just think about them enough, and you become comfortable with them and all that.
Yeah.
And there's some things that are bad. There's some truths that are bad. And I don't really know what to say about that. But
Yeah. I don't know what to say about that either. I guess just realizing it. Like, yeah, realizing it is good. It's good.
But not dwelling on it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, there's some horrible things that have happened in history and stuff like this.
Big time. Yeah.
And I don't know if there's like a positive outlook on this. But
yeah. Humans can be very, very cruel to each other. Even like, at any capacity. Even day-to-day life. We can still be cruel to each other even though we live in the modern age and we're like, even, I don't know, in our day-to-day experiences here, like the day that you might have had it, the day that I might have had, we could choose to be very cruel to somebody for no reason at all. And
yeah,
but it's usually because we're hurting on the inside, I think. Yeah, hurt people. Yeah,
probably. I always, it keeps coming up on this podcast, so I'm annoying people with my Kierkegaard references. But there's another thing he says about freedom. I talked about freedom in the last episode, the dizziness of freedom. How, like, that freedom is not always good. It can freak you out a little bit. And one of the things he says about that is you get scared of the things you could do because you, like, stand on the edge of a cliff and you're not scared of falling because you're not going to fall, but you're scared because you have the freedom to jump.
Yeah.
And you're scared of yourself. Like the consequences of the things you could do, like nothing. Like you don't need to think about it for more than half of a second,
I wonder if that's probably connected to how people stand on the edge of a balcony or a cliff, and like most of I'm just gonna say my brain goes, why don't you just like jump? What would happen if you just jumped? And then I don't do it. Like my physical being is like, well, we're not gonna do that, and also my mental state goes like, I don't want to do that. But like the thought comes into your head.
And it's scary.
Yeah. So, why do we do that? It's interesting. It's like we because it goes against everything our psychology says about staying alive and surviving. Maybe it's the crushing weight, the pressure is too much in that moment. Like you could just end it all right now.
Yeah, it's fucking weird. I think that most people would be like, I don't know. My brain jumps to like kind of two kinds of responses to this. One is like thinking like it's just what it's like to be human, like you're free and you can do whatever you want, but like it just doesn't line up with the theory of evolution, like you say. Like why do we have this consciousness and why are we free to jump? Like why aren't we just robots that sort of learned to always keeping on, like no matter what, and never consider the stuff that could kill us? Like it's weird.
And also, have we created a society that makes us want to jump? Like, because when we had more fear and less comfort in our lives and we had to survive more, were we more worried? Like, would our brains still go, you could just jump when we, like, had all these predators behind us that could kill us anyway? Like, is it because we're too comfortable now that our brain is like, we don't have enough danger that propels us forward for survival, so we create our own danger in our heads?
Ooh, well, I have heard that suicide is sort of a new concept and that it happens a lot less in poorer countries.
Yeah.
You're
fighting to survive.
Yeah, you fight to survive, and then as soon as you're not, it's like, yeah. Well, I totally know that feeling of like all my life I watch adventure movies and I want to be like a hero on an adventure and I want to like have things that are about to kill me, you know what I mean? And then it's like you would want to be in danger so that you could run away from that danger, but then as soon as you're free from it, you're like, okay, what now?
Yeah. It's a good thought, and it's a scary thought as well. Scary in a good way. Most things are scary in a good way, I think. Yeah, who knows? I think it's still better to be in now times and not have to be running away from like a woolly mammoth or a saber-toothed tiger.
True, just a PhD.
Yeah, just a PhD. I don't know. Maybe they'd be like, if evolutionary, if we go down the tree, they'd be like, what are you doing? This is terrible. I'd definitely rather take what I have than what you guys are up to.
True. They wouldn't get it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't know how to. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely met some people who they're much more happy doing like physical labor and jobs like that than ever touching a computer. And it's not because they're so much tougher or even more lazy, like either of those. It's just like, I don't know what it is, but yeah.
Yeah.
It could be either, actually, but
I don't know. I guess you'll have to get one of them on your podcast next.
True. So many
dive
interesting
into
people.
their brains, see what's going on there.
Yeah, what's going on with you? Why?
Tell me your secrets.
Yeah. Huh. Who would you interview?
That's a good question. Who would I interview?
Like, if you were doing it for my podcast, or maybe if you could just interview anybody.
Okay.
You can answer either question.
Okay, realistic realm, like who could I get easily on hand? I'd probably want to interview my parents, because I want to know more about why they are the way they are, like the way
That's
that.
sick.
Yeah.
No, and the thing is like, I guess you already know this because you want to interview them, but like you would learn new things.
Yeah.
Like I'm learning new things about my good friends just by sitting down and like putting them in a new context and then asking them questions that normally you just assume you know or something.
Yeah, like because there's a lot that we don't. When you think of it, like even our friends, even some of our closest friends, they don't know everything about all the experiences that we've had in our life. And my parents, especially stemming from a different country than the country that I grew up in, there's so many experiences that they've had that I could never relate to, and they haven't never even wanted to tell me. Like I'd have to sit them down like this and go like, okay, why do you think you react this way when this topic is brought up? Or like just dive into, basically give them free therapy. Except I'm not a therapist, so
yeah,
maybe re-traumatize them a little bit. I don't know.
This is what's happening here sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's so good.
Yeah. But if I could get anybody, I'd probably want to interview somebody like Oprah or...
Oprah?
Yeah.
But there's so much of her on there interviewing other
That's
people.
True. Yeah. But I don't want to I don't want to find out what makes her tick in that case. She's more of like a stranger. I just want to find out what her keys to success are. Like I want to get advice from her. For her, it's more like, how can you benefit me instead of how can I help you? I guess.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Yeah, fair enough. But there's probably something out there of her talking. I mean, there's a lot of content now of successful people talking about how to be successful.
That's true. Yeah.
A lot of podcasts like Tim Ferriss and it's super valuable, but I find that they kind of say the same things over and over again. That you're always saying things like, don't give up, like bloody blah. They had a hard come up and they wanted to give up a bunch of times, and then they're like talking about all these things and they have all these metaphors and whatever. But I think that my personal opinion is that, yeah, maybe that's true, but we only get to hear about the successful people. And I feel like all the like unsuccessful people I meet and talk to, or like, I mean, somewhat like just semi-successful, just regular people, they say the same things and they know the same things. So I think it's just like, I don't know. I think it's the successful people are very confident that they're right, and you just follow them and you'll succeed because that's their experience. But a lot of people they live by similar sort of rules, and they're not in the same position as them.
You think it's more luck of the draw?
I don't know. Obviously there's some level of it, but yeah, I don't know. I just think that for me personally, I'm not interested. I know there's a little bit of self-help going on in this podcast, but I'm not interested in learning and reading any more self-help stuff. I know I'm always saying you don't know enough, like there's always more to know, but I find it repetitive, and that I should just do those things that I know I should do rather than rather than learning more about the same shit.
Yeah. Like at a certain point, nothing's gonna help you more than action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's a good point. That's a very good point.
There's a little self-help for you.
Yeah, a little tip, free of charge.
Yeah. Do you listen to self-help stuff?
I do. Well,
Or read,
not
or-
very often, but recently, like in the last year to 2 years, I've started getting into it. And mainly books. Like I'm a big fan of, what's it called? Big Magic, Creative Living Without Fear. It's by Elizabeth Gilbert. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love, which I'm kind of hesitant to admit because I feel like Eat, Pray, Love is like, every woman goes through a breakup and then she's in her Eat, Pray, Love era. So I don't want to be in that stereotypical group, but I am.
It's pretty impressive that she could write a book about, like, something that everyone goes through.
Yeah.
But she could be the one to, like, make money off of it and express it.
Big money. 'Cause Julia Roberts
Yeah.
played her in the movie,
Yeah.
and that movie was massive. And that was like I've never read Eat, Pray, Love, but I've seen the movie a bunch of times. Because every time I go through a breakup, I watch Eat, Pray, Love.
Oh, wow.
So it's a little personal tidbit about me that nobody asked for.
That's, I mean, I see, I don't know you well enough to ask the right questions, but so please just fire away.
So now you've learned something new. But her other book, Creative Living, or Big Magic, Creative Living Without Fear, it's really popular as well. It was a New York Times bestseller, and it dives less into, like, feeling happy on your own and, like, the usual breakup tropes, and it dives more into something that everybody can relate to without going through some sort of tragic circumstance. It's just like you taking your life as it is and looking at the patterns that you have that cause you to hold yourself back and in turn make yourself unhappy in certain areas of your life, and how you could change that around. And one of the ideas that she talks about that I find really fascinating is the fact that all ideas that form in our brains come from this realm, like beyond the physical. And all of us, everybody that has conscience, has access to this realm. So if you have the idea, like you want to put, elephant meat on pizza and make it really popular, if you neglect that idea, then that idea goes and finds somebody else who will complete it. So then you might run into another person 3 years down the line that made elephant meat on pizza super famous, and you were like, I had that exact idea, but I just didn't execute it. And here this person is who executed it, and they're thriving off of it. And that's not a fault to you, because another idea always comes, but it's just an interesting concept that we all have access to this creative realm where ideas go to and come from to us. And yeah, I just find it really cool.
Yeah, it's a fun way of thinking about it. Oh yeah, okay, so that kind of comes back to something you mentioned earlier, this concept of missing out. When you were talking about your PhD and you're like, you have talent, and if you don't harness it, you don't use it to the maximum capacity, you miss out on it and you waste it. I've talked to a lot of people recently who are having this idea about their 20s and how it's like escaping them, and they feel like they need to capitalize on it because, I think we all understand that people are telling us it's the best time of your life, do bloody whatever but it's not clear what you should do. They're just like, do it.
Just everything.
And I would say, like, yeah, you should do that. You should do that your whole life. You should do what you want to do your whole life. And you should make your whole life as good as it can be. But part of one way, it's kind of backwards in my opinion, because, one way of making your life as good as possible is sort of ignoring that idea and not freaking out about your time going away, because then you spend your time freaking out. So, yeah, what do you think about this idea of lost
time.
opportunity, and capitalizing on these good things and not pressure to do so?
I definitely think it's pressure that we put on ourselves. I don't think that the pressure is real, because logistically our lifespans are so much longer. Like, when you're in your 20s, by the time you make it to your 30s, you're not even halfway through your life, if we're counting on the average lifespan, right? So I feel like we just as a society have put all this pressure on ourselves to achieve a certain amount by a certain age. But when you look at the numbers, you realize that it's just a psychological game, and it's not something, even when you look at the numbers of people who have become successful and what age they've reached their peak success at, we as a society have just put this extreme value on youth and achieving things when you're really young. Like you see that with the Forbes 30 under 30 list, which I personally find ridiculous. Not as a slight to anybody who's made it to the list, but I just feel like it just perpetuates everything that we're talking about, all the fear about, like, if you reach 30 and you haven't achieved certain things, or you haven't, like, made it to this list or made it in other areas, then you're losing out. When the reality is that some of the most successful people on earth did not make it anywhere, even before their 40s, even before their 50s, some of them. It's just like...
Yeah, a lot of famous writers, they wrote their famous books at 50 or something.
We have so much more time than we feel we do, and we put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And I'm not saying that I don't subscribe to that pressure, but I find myself constantly fighting against it, because we're constantly fed images, especially, like, to dive deeper, like, if you identify as a woman, women are told that their youth is their value a lot of the time. And I don't really think that's true, because there are a lot of older women that I find very attractive personally. But as a general society, like, standard, we are told that women should be young and women should be youthful, and that's just another added thing on top of the general pressure of needing to achieve by a certain age. And it's just not, it's not true, but I don't know how to combat it, because everybody's affected by it. I think you just need to tell yourself, when you catch yourself thinking like that, just remind yourself that you have more time than you think you do, and there's a lot that can be achieved, and there's a lot to be experienced.
Yeah, nice. That's beautiful. There are also old people telling us that, life is fast, and they're like, how did I get here? But what does fast mean? Like, yeah, they got to an age that they never really expected to get to. I get it. Like, that's how I feel at 23, Yeah. It's like, when I was a kid, I thought I'd never be 23. It went by so fast, but, I mean, I did a lot.
Yeah.
And it was great. But, yeah, so what does that concept of speed mean?
Maybe we don't have enough presence.
Yeah.
Because I find myself, in day-to-day life, I rush through things. Like, I'm always thinking about, okay, what's next on my to-do list? But I think if you live your life in a state of more taking in what's around you instead of rushing through it, then, and it's hard, once again, because we're constantly, especially with our smartphones and stuff, fed all these things and all these notifications that keep us rushing forwards. But I think if you're able to keep yourself in a state of presence, time passes much more slowly than if you spend your time just numbing yourself.
That's a really good point. Like an hour in the park where you're just conscious and there. It's serious. I did that this morning. Like, I was going and running every morning, and then my toes are sore, so I can't run. So,
betraying you.
And then I would normally, like, do some yoga or something, but this morning I was like, you know what, it's okay. And I just sat in the park, and I had like a full hour, I knew, before I like really even needed to think about going to work. And that was like, normally that 1 hour in the morning feels like kind of a rush, kind of like, it's just kind of like work is going to come soon. But this time it was like, whoa, what am I going to do in the park for an hour? Like, what the hell am I going to do? I just sat there. So it's cool. So yeah, time is interesting like that. And there's this idea I associate, my whole life I've associated this idea, this word patience, with like ancient wisdom. Patience and ancient wisdom, they always come together, I think. And patience, you don't really hear a lot about it in today's world. It's not hyped up too much. Yeah. It's just like this idea, like, oh, be patient, but like, I don't want to,
Or if you're patient, then you might like miss your opportunity.
Yeah,
in such a rush.
Something like that.
Yeah. I don't know. I wanted to say, like, grad school is one of those things, like long-term gratification, because you spend so many years, and then you get a career out of it. But it really depends where you take that career, because you could have had a career that would make the same amount of money or more money in a shorter amount of time.
Why do you do grad school?
Because I'm passionate about the field that I want to go into, and the only way to be at the forefront of the field that I want to go into, which is deep sea exploration, is to have a PhD. There's a glass ceiling otherwise. Even though some of the people like a few generations ago, or even like one or two generations ago, who had the chief scientist roles that I'm after did not have a PhD, but life and the world has changed now, and so that's why I'm getting one.
Do you think it's better that the people in your position would have to have a PhD?
I don't think so.
Okay.
No, I don't think so, because I've met plenty of brilliant people, and more free thinking as well, so more creative in the solutions that they come up with that don't have PhDs or aren't pursuing PhDs. I think that there are plenty of people who pursue PhDs that are very creative, and very capable of coming up with new ideas and new ways of doing things. But I don't think just because you're pursuing a PhD, it inherently makes you qualified for a role like that with the way that your brain works, because academia, as we know, it can beat people down and take creativity out of people, instead of doing what we assume it will do, which is like infusing creativity into people. It can also have the alternate effect depending on who you're working with, and the experiences that you have. So it's kind of a double-edged sword, because it can promote people, but it can also really dull them.
Definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say how much I learned in university versus how much I learned traveling, but they're different. But I definitely learned a lot traveling, and I don't want to put down grad school, but I always personally thought of it as an option.
Yes.
Something that if I started it, I would finish it, because I've always started all the things I finished in school. You know what I mean? I started university, I graduated from university.
Mm-hmm.
So I think of it as kind of a safe option. Whereas like if I started a business, I would think of that as like risky and something I probably wouldn't succeed at,
That is true.
Yeah, it is like, for me, it would be an easier thing. Not that it would be easy going through it, because I know that like when you're in it, it's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Like you have to do a ton of work, but it's something that like if you start, you just take it, like for me, I would take it one day at a time. Whereas like a business, I would be thinking about like the end.
Yeah.
And it would scare me out of doing it.
And
but the PhD would never scare me out of doing it. If that makes sense.
And in grad school, you're more on a track. Like, at least in Canada, like, you have a stipend that's coming in every month. Like, there's more restraint. Whereas a business, if you're not excelling, you're not making money, then there's nothing to save you. Yeah. That makes sense.
So, that could be a reason why, like, a difference between people who are doing grad school versus not, something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Definitely, there are people who stay in academia forever because they're afraid of the real world, I think.
Yeah.
And there are people who stay in it because they really have a passion for it, but if you want to, you could never leave school. You could finish your PhD, you could do a postdoc, you could do another postdoc, you could do a third postdoc, and then eventually go into the professor route and, like, never have to deal with private sector and the uncertainty of that. Never have to take any real risk. And there are plenty of people that go that route, but it's not for me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Cool. Yeah, wow. So, like I said, we covered a lot. It was awesome. Thank you so much, Mo. It's just like always so exciting to see how, meeting for a moment in a loud room where we could say just a few words to each other turns into this.
Yeah. That's one of my favorite parts of traveling, and I'm really happy to be a part of this podcast, and I'm happy that I ran into you in some random bar and we could have a more in-depth conversation about the way we think about the world.
Yeah, sick.
Yeah.
And I hope this inspires you to start your podcast.
Yes.
One day about talking to grad students, maybe.
Yeah.
About their experiences, so we can dig into all those stuff we touched on that, like, I made a bunch of assumptions about and you told your experience about, but then, there's just so much more.
Somebody else might have a different view of academia and why they want to stay in it rather than leave.
You could talk to one of those for lifers.
Yeah. One of those safe people, as I call them, and maybe they see it differently.
Yeah. Well, okay, by the way, I also this one of the people who was telling me about their fear, sort of slash acknowledgement of the fleeting 20s. They also were talking about how women they have their young beauty, and that she was like, whoa, old people are beautiful too, and she opened my mind to that a bit. And I remember, like, very soon after that, I met, like, 2 very beautiful old women, and I was like, oh wow. But to be honest, since then I haven't met that many beautiful old people. There's a few, but, like, young people are more beautiful.
It's true. But we're also, it's like evolutionarily wired, socially wired to like find them more beautiful.
Yeah, but like, what is beauty then? If we don't trust our own instinct of what beauty is, then what is beauty? Beauty is what we perceive. Yes.
Well, statistically, more young people are going to be more beautiful, but there are plenty of older people that are beautiful.
Yeah. I met this this cool looking old man the other day, and he told me this great story that I'll share with everyone. It was like a cheesy love story if it were in a movie, but it was real. He said that he met his wife when he was 19, and then they were friends for 2.5 years. And then one day he said, I can't take this friendship. And she said, what? You don't want to be friends with me? And he said, I want to be your lover.
Oh my God. Wow, how intense.
Yeah, wow. Right?
Well, it worked, obviously.
And she said, at least the way his story goes, is, finally. And she threw her arms around him. And now they're married, and he's old.
Wow. That's going to make me cry later, I think, when I think about it. I'm not going to think about it too hard right now. I'm not crying on the podcast, but...
No way. No crying on the podcast. No crying on the podcast.
But later. I'll save it for later. Suck it back in.
All right. So, this is us signing off. Yes. The Post Definitions Podcast. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I had a great time.
Wow. Awesome. We're going to drink more beer.
Yeah. Woo!